Welcome to everybody joining today and watching today. We are very excited to be hosting this webinar that focuses on a topic so squarely close to our hearts: the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We are all touched by the SDGs, and we all have a contribution to make towards the SDGs. The business world recognizes this, with many businesses making commitments and promises to take action towards the goals. After all, there's no future for the economy without a future for the planet. The question is, how can companies actually move from making commitments to making real progress? We are excited to have a conversation today with both academics and companies to discuss different strategies for making contributions towards the SDGs. In particular, we will discuss a potential tension that exists between focusing and specializing on one or two SDGs, while also keeping an eye on the range of business impacts that can occur across all the SDGs. In 2019, B Lab, together with the UN Global Compact, started an exploration partly in response to this tension: how to plan for and track business engagement towards the SDGs. The collaboration culminated in a tool for business called the SDG Action Manager, which is free and available online today for any business to use. The tool is an attempt to enable companies to turn intentions into actions and to follow through on those actions with goal setting, guidance, and measurement. Today, we look at how companies are approaching the SDGs by using data from the SDG Action Manager. I will later on ask my colleague Michele Bradley to guide us through the data we have gathered and to learn more about business engagement, as well as some of the lessons learned. And this then provides a good starting point to dive more deeply. We have invited 3 researchers who've done insightful work on how companies can approach, strategize towards the SDGs. We have invited Kendall Park, Assistant Professor of Organization Studies at Vanderbilt University; Matthew Grimes, Professor of Organizational Theory and Information Systems at the University of Cambridge; and Joel Gaiman, Professor of Strategic Management and Public Policy at George Washington University. These 3 researchers will share ideas, insights, guidance, and tools on how to navigate the space of making a strategy for companies to work towards the SDGs. We're equally thrilled to hear from a B Corp in East Africa. Sriram Bhattaram is the founder of Kuza Biashara, a social technology enterprise supporting farmers based out of Nairobi in Kenya. Sri will share his experience of working with the SDG Action Manager to track and manage contributions towards the SDGs. As B Lab, we are thrilled to be hosting this webinar and bringing these different contributors together. It's one example of the ways in which we hope we can build a bridge between the world of academia and knowledge generation and the world of business and practice where the change happens. There are so many opportunities for learning, sharing, for insights, and we hope that this webinar will provide inspiration to continue efforts towards the SDGs. And now, to get us going, I'll first hand over to my colleague Michele. Michele, can you provide some context around the development of the SDG Action Manager and some of the insights we've drawn from its use so far?
Yes, happy to. So 2 years ago, B Lab launched the SDG Action Manager. It's an impact measurement and management tool that's integrated with our main tool for B Corp certification, the B Impact Assessment. The SDG Action Manager allows companies to set goals and measure progress towards each of the SDGs. This tool essentially translates the SDGs into concrete actions, indicators, and benchmarks that all businesses can use to contribute to the achievement of the SDGs by 2030. It's organized into 17 modules. There's a required baseline with a general introduction, 16 modules for SDGs 1 through 16, and Goal 17, Partnership for the Goals, is integrated throughout all of the modules. Within each module are indicators related to business best practices, broken down by questions about the company's business model, internal operations, supply chain, collective action, and negative impact risk. So to answer the question of how we've used the data collected from this tool at B Lab, for background, my name is Michele Bradley, and I'm a senior data analyst here at B Lab. I spend lots of time digging into our data and creating insights. So last year, using data from the 15,000 companies that signed into the SDG Action Manager, our team produced an SDG Insights report and drew conclusions about how businesses are engaging with the SDGs and answered questions like, where are companies setting goals and which SDGs do companies focus on most? So if you're interested in learning more about that, definitely check out our website to download the SDG Insights report. Link for that is in the description. In the past year, though, we've had an additional 10,000 companies sign on to the SDG Action Manager. These companies are of various sizes, located all around the world, and are in a range of industries. But most of them are located in Europe, have about 1 to 9 employees, and are in the service industry. So while that is a bit of a limitation of our data set, we really do think that it nonetheless provides really powerful insights and a unique window into understanding how companies are interacting with sustainable development goals. I think one of our most interesting insights and findings is that we found that most companies were most focused on their internal operations than in their supply chain or what they could be doing for collective action. And so while it's great that companies are looking inwards, we believe that in order for us to achieve the SDGs by 2030, we need more companies to drive changes systematically within business and focus more on changing policy within their industry or working with other companies in their industry to shift norms. So the graph here shows how average performance by aspect of a business and across all SDGs looked like in 2021 and in 2022. So as you can see, companies on average only slightly improved on their internal operations and on average have been performing worse on questions related to business model, supply chain, and collective action. So we were digging into our data, found similar trends that were holding true for goal setting as well, which sort of indicated that companies were more inclined to focus on short-term, likely easier to implement improvement opportunities rather than those that are most impactful and strategic. So we actually have a few more interesting SDG data updates up on our blog, so definitely check that out to learn some more about our findings. Link for that shall be in the description.
Thanks, Michele. Interesting figures, but also with a call to action. So Kendall, this might be a good moment to turn to you. What are different ways in which businesses can take action on the SDGs? And what do you see as opportunities or potential tensions that are introduced by standards and tools like the SDG Action Manager?
Yeah, so these kinds of standards and assessments like the SDG Action Manager, like the B Impact Assessment, really highlight a trade-off between the depth and the breadth of innovations necessary to tackle some of the world's most pressing problems. And what we mean when we talk about depth and breadth is that some organizations create social impact by attending to a wide range of environmental, social, and governance issues, but perhaps a bit superficially, right? Spreading themselves really thin across a lot of different issues. And we call those organizations generalists. This is a generalist strategy. Others might invest really deeply into a single issue, right? Perhaps a single SDG or a single area of the BIA, like a single social problem, without paying as much attention to other issues in other arenas. And we call them specialists. And what we see with these standards and assessments is that they sometimes push in both directions. So if we think about the B Impact Assessment, right, or even the SDG Action Manager, they seem to sometimes reward incremental progress toward an array of these social and environmental goals, this kind of generalist strategy, right? The folks at B Lab will tell you that to achieve 80 points on the B Impact Assessment, right, the minimum necessary score to become certified, a company can't be only good in one area, right? They have to be doing well in a lot of different areas. But even as the BIA, the SDG Action Manager, encourage generalization, B Lab and other organizations also push companies toward specialized impact as well. But think about how B Lab offers these specialized rewards, things like best for workers, best for the environment, that highlight and reward companies that are excelling in a single domain. And the result of this is that sometimes organizations are left without clarity about which strategy to pursue, right? To pursue a generalist strategy or a specialist strategy. And we think it's important to highlight the trade-offs between these two strategies because organizations have limited resources, right? Limited time, limited expertise, limited money. And as much as we would love to see organizations investing deeply in every single social problem that exists, right, that isn't really reasonable. And so what we see instead is that there's this tension between specializing in a particular social issue or generalizing across domains. And really, neither of these strategies is intrinsically superior because that depth might come at the expense of breadth and vice versa. And we think that it's critical to recognize this trade-off because just as the problems underlying SDGs are interconnected and interdependent, right? That's what we mean when we talk about wicked problems, these big problems that are all connected to each other. Their solutions are undoubtedly inextricably linked too, sometimes in really subtle ways, such that advancement toward one goal can cause unexpected losses from another, right? So think, for example, about how attempts to foster economic development might exacerbate environmental concerns, right? Or, a singular focus on climate change could hamper economic development in underserved communities and make inequality worse. When these problems are interdependent, both specialization and generalization can undermine impact. And so what we propose is this concept of generalized specialization, right? Suggesting that organizations should avoid the tendency to either over-focus on one SDG without attending to any of the others, but also avoid the tendency to merely scratch the surface across multiple goals. And so what a generalized specialist strategy does is it allows companies to create that deep impact, but also control for those externalities and unintended consequences. And there's not any single way to be a generalized specialist, right? A company could invest in, a single social issue deeply and then make sure that they attend to all of the others. They could invest in kind of a cluster of interconnected social and environmental issues, right? They could focus on a couple of issues at a time. But the point is, right, to try to reduce that tension, to try to do a little bit of both, right? To do some, leveraging your core competencies, understanding the problems that you are uniquely suited to address and investing deeply in them, but also remaining vigilant and attending to these other social issues at the same time.
Great, thank you, Kendall, for that overview. And it actually also you touch on an important design feature that the SDG Action Manager had with both, as Michele outlined, a general module that everybody had to complete, and then specialized modules for each SDG. Michele, how is that worked out in practice? How do we see the uptake of different modules and choices made by companies?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, the SDGs are interconnected and holistic. And so a company does have to choose to prioritize one or many goals in the SDG Action Manager. So as Kendall says, the balance of breadth and depth is necessary for a company to meaningfully advance the SDGs. Back in 2021, we actually looked at our data and found that most companies completed one SDG. They focused on one when they were using the tool, while on average, a company completed around 7. So as you can see on the graph, we also found that there were some companies that were super determined to take a comprehensive approach and they prioritized nearly all of them. So I think if we think about this generalized specialist approach while looking at this chart, we can also say that maybe there are too many companies that decided to take a one or all approach when more should be focusing on a strategic approach to focusing on a few.
Thanks, Michele. And maybe with some re-strategizing following the insights from today, we may not see that U-curve anymore in the future, and it may start to take a slightly different shape. Turning our attention now to practice, Shri, how have you engaged with the SDGs in your work with Kuza Biashara? And have you noticed the tension between generalist and specialist approaches?
At Kuza Biashara, we create opportunities for youth, women, and small business owners from low-income communities to learn, connect, and grow on their terms. In 2017, we won the UN SDG Innovation Challenge and had an opportunity to present at the UN General Assembly in New York. The organizers insisted on we mapping our work to the UN SDGs. While we hated doing that seemingly theoretical work, the unintended consequence of that effort was Our work got global recognition, and we also could report our impact across 10 of the UN SDGs. And most importantly, we got a realization that we need to pivot ourselves from being a generalist to a specialist or a generalized specialist. We learned about the B impact assessment and became a certified B corporation and part of the founding class of B corporations from Africa in 2018. As Kendall mentioned, this entire journey gave us a clarity to invest in a single issue deeply and address other interconnected social and environmental issues by leveraging our core competencies and strengths. Thanks to this thinking, our network has grown exponentially in the past 4 years and impacting over 6.2 million people from low-income communities, and we have created over 150,000 new jobs across Africa and Asia.
Matthew, may I turn to you? What can businesses do to get clarity on SDG action, and how can tools like an SDG action manager fit in to the framework you also propose in the paper?
Right. So the tension that Kendall has discussed is a big challenge, right? I mean, if you're trying to engage with SDGs, it doesn't seem sufficient to just have your organization focus on one, but then ignore all of these others, particularly because, as Kendall mentioned, these issues are intertwined. And then on the other hand, it also feels insufficient to spread yourself really thin across all of these different SDGs. So as Michele noted, how then do you develop a more strategic approach to thinking about opportunities for impact? And so within our research, we've tried to come up with, I guess, what we would call kind of a 4-stage process for identifying opportunities for impact. And so part of that kind of involves looking inward, diagnosing inside the business. And then part of it involves doing a bit of a diagnostic within the organization's broader environment. So the first step of this 4-stage process is really about considering the existing overlaps between your own business and the SDGs. And so you can think about this overlap in a couple different ways. So the first way to think about it might just be to think about where your business is already excellent at creating value and whether or not some of the associated activities are contributing to social and environmental impacts or might easily be generating social and environmental impacts. And I should mention, this is also where I think the SDG Action Manager can be quite good, just kind of helping provide an initial baseline understanding of where there's good overlaps between your existing activities and the SDGs more broadly. But there's another bigger overlap that also you need to think about, which is kind of the materiality, which is a way of thinking about the long-term opportunities and risks that your business might be exposed to when you think about the social problems that underlie or underpin the SDGs. So if you think about how those problems might be material to the long-term success of your business, clearly these are also places where your business should double down. So that's step one, right? Consider the existing overlaps between your business and the SDGs. The second step in the process is really about recognizing that we live in a social world where there are reputational benefits from being a more responsible organization, and typically, some reputational costs associated with being an irresponsible organization. And so, thinking through that lens, you might actually move beyond just kind of a consideration of where there's a strategic overlap or material overlap between the SDGs and your business, but also thinking about where there might be a reputational overlap. So, in other words, think about each of these SDGs and whether there's going to be a reputational gain from applying some resources and energy towards addressing some of these issues, or costs associated with failing to do so. So that's the second step in the process, is really considering the reputational gains from creating particular types of SDG impact and the reputational costs from failing to do so. So the third step in this process is really about, again, kind of looking outside the business now and thinking about the strengths and problems of your broader context. So all organizations exist in different contexts, different industries, different regions, and these contexts are going to be either stronger or weaker at addressing the Sustainable Development Goals. And so you have to understand how you are fitting into that context. So, think about your particular region where your organization is embedded or headquartered, and how strong has that region been, both in terms, the public, the private, and the civil sector within that region. How strong are these different sectors at addressing, a particular SDG like climate action, right? So, on the one hand, if this on the web, Siri's talking to me for a second. If your region tends to be particularly strong at addressing climate action, it may be that this is an opportunity for you to build on that strength, right? For you to raise additional finances, to attract talent, to expand your strategic partnerships in that region. But then again, on the other hand, to the extent that your region or your context might be particularly poor at addressing a given SDG, well, that is also an opportunity, right? It means that there's a void, there's a gap in that context, and that might be a real opportunity for your organization to lean in and help to fill that gap. So that's step 3, looking outside the business and considering the strengths and the problems of your context and how your business might fit in to that context. And the 4th step comes back around to this kind of tension between breadth and depth. And so we created a tool that we think kind of works in tandem with the SDG Action Manager. And we've referred to it as kind of the SDG Impact Canvas, but it's a way of basically visualizing how your organization is contributing to various SDGs so that you can see the breadth and the depth at which you are applying resources and energy towards different SDGs, to allow you to not just visualize, but then to track over time how that might be changing. And I think, again, this is where the SDG Action Manager has been very effective at really allowing companies to not just determine that initial baseline, like I was referring to in the first step of this process, but really about tracking your progress over time to see your impact journey over time. So we think the Impact Canvas is a simple tool for helping to visualize that depth and breadth trade-off in tandem with tools like the SDG Action Manager. And in going through this 4-stage process, our hope is that this will provide companies with a bit more clarity as to how to be a bit more strategic about engaging with the SDGs.
Thanks, Matthew, for running us through all those steps and stages that are also, I should say to all the viewers, very clearly outlined, of course, in the paper that's available through open access online and to which you can find the links with the video. I have to say that the sense I also had when reading the paper is that it really helps, I hope, companies get over what might be an overwhelming feeling, right? There are so many SDGs. They touch on the root problems that the world is facing and that the UN is trying to address. And humbled by that, I guess it can be, very overwhelming to know where to start. So I really hope that the tools can work in the way that they enable and to make steps, to make first steps, maybe to make next steps for some others. And when companies do start to do that, Joel, where do you see the potential for business to have a more powerful contribution to achieve the SDGs? How can they make that more powerful contribution?
Yeah, thank you, Joachim. I think, as you were just noting, one of the challenges for any business is deciding where to start. And, as you pointed out, the SDGs, there are the 17 of them, but if you drill down, there are sub-targets, so there are over, I think it's around 170 sub-targets nested within the SDGs. And so any business can sort of quickly feel themselves being overwhelmed, like, how am I going to make a dent in all of this, even with the best of intentions and aspirations? So I think there are, sort of three ways at least that, the work that we've done tries to help businesses think about how they can connect to those SDGs and make a more powerful impact. When I talk to my MBA students, one of the things I ask them is, what's the value of theory? Like, why have a theory? And I think one of the reasons that theories are powerful is it provides you a sort of an orientation or a map to think about how you might begin to take action. And even if the map isn't perfectly lined up with the territory that you're confronting, it still provides, sort of an orientation and allows you to sort of take stock of your circumstances, make a plan, and get going. And so one of the ways our framework helps is, I think that, metaphorically, you can think about it as helping you create your map for action. The second thing that we've seen today is, the framework begins to give a management team, an organization, a vocabulary for starting to have a conversation with themselves about what it is they're doing and what it is they might do as part of their sustainability journey. And, in one hand, that might seem like a small thing, but, to the extent you think about someone like Wittgenstein's idea that the limits of your language are the limits of your world, having a new vocabulary is actually, literally can be world changing. You can now start to see distinctions that you didn't see before in your environment. You can start to think about impacts that you're having for good or ill that you weren't necessarily attuned to. And so right away, we think that one of the ways that this framework can be powerful is that a management team can start discussing and debating. For instance, do I want to be a generalist? I never even thought of myself in those terms. Do I want to be a specialist? What kinds of priorities do we want to make? Sometimes you may have made priorities, more or less by default or by backing into them, but they weren't necessarily intended. And so this allows you to surface, where exactly are you making commitments? And so the vocabulary helps you to make those distinctions. And then I think the third way, and perhaps the most important way, is that creates a way of catalyzing action and alignment for the entire management team. So there are lots of reasons that organizations engage in strategy making, but one of the key benefits of engaging in this kind of strategic work is to bring alignment throughout the organization so you can articulate what it is we stand for. And at the same time, one of the most important things we know about strategy is if you're not saying no to things, you don't have a strategy. So what the framework also allows you to do is to figure out what is it we want to say yes to and what is it we want to say no to, so that we can, as a result, actually make some difference on some of the areas. And so I think in that way, it provides, management teams, organizations with the ability to build a roadmap for themselves, to think about where they want to contribute in a powerful way to the SDGs. And then, to understand that they're making choices about where not to play. And then, of course, to do that repeatedly over time, right? So it's not just a once and done, exercise, but you would come back to this as part of your sustainability journey as you, learn and build capabilities in one area. You might decide to deepen and go further there, or you might also decide that, places where you thought you had strengths or could make a difference, maybe it's not worked out as well as you thought, and it allows you to divert your resources elsewhere.
Great. Thank you for that contribution too. And a good reminder that strategy is also about saying no, maybe something we often forget when we're enthusiastic about things we can achieve, that the saying no is an important part of thinking that through and working it through. Sri, turning back to you, because it's so valuable to also hear the voice from practice and to learn about your lived experience. How have you used B Lab's tools, such as the SDG Action Manager or the BIA, to inform your SDG strategy? Do you foresee any adaptations even based on today's conversation?
Yeah, so we sat down as a team and made a map, a measurable, accountable plan for action in consultation with our management team, our extended partners, communities, and most importantly, our customers. When we reflected deeply on that and applied the lens of the SDG Action Manager and B Impact Assessment tool, two things bubbled up clearly. One, a start doing list, and second, a stop doing list. And as a company, we made a conscious choice to start saying no to very many ideas, references, and are now deliberate about what we want to do, how we want to do, and be intentional about the actions we take. As Joel mentioned, what we need is a language and vocabulary. We intend to actively adopt the framework so that we can articulate and, in a way, articulate our narrative and consciously work towards socializing it with all our stakeholders. As I said again, the unintended consequence of this framework thinking is that Kuza Biashara got recognized as the best for the world for customers 3 years in a row, and our current B impact assessment score has gone up by 30%.
We are also curious, as is common also in academic papers, to hear what your future plans are. What are the future exciting avenues of research that you might be able to share with us? And maybe if you can, touch on the role that B Corps can play in that. What role can the data on B Corps play in that to make sure we all put our effort in on that front as well?
So, I mean, one of the things that Joel just mentioned is the value of theories as a map. I think partially one of the things that we would like to do in terms of pushing the theory that we've created here around generalization and specialization, pushing that forward, is to determine whether this map is in fact a valuable map, is a correct map of the world and the territory. So I think in doing that kind of research is going to involve asking questions about, for instance, how do firms actually benefit reputationally from specializing or generalizing in their approach to the SDGs? Or, for example, what are the actual impacts of these different targeting strategies, right? So to the extent that organizations are starting to specialize, well, what are the effects of that organizationally, but also societally? And to the extent that multiple organizations within an industry are specializing, how does that either work together well or work together negatively? So pushing our research to actually begin to test this map, so to speak, to test this theory, I think is one of the directions we'd like to take it.
Yeah, I think the other issue here is that the SDGs are global goals, right? They're societal level goals, and we're talking about action at the company level. So this raises big questions about how companies can make progress, right? These smaller units of analysis, companies can make progress toward these really large goals. And for what we suggest, right, companies taking this sort of generalized specialist strategy, for this to work, we need enough organizations to be targeting each of the SDGs, right? We need their efforts to be evenly dispersed rather than seeing, most companies are working towards these specific problems and then these other problems are going untouched. And we don't really know how that's working, right? And this is something that the data that you all are collecting can help us with is figuring out how these efforts are distributed so that we can know whether we're making real progress kind of evenly toward all of these SDGs.
Yeah, I think the one other piece kind of builds on both what Matthew and Kendall talked about. A lot of my work thinks about intertemporality. So the challenges of sustainability, if you think about it as a journey, the question is, what should I be doing today to perhaps affect a change tomorrow, where tomorrow might not literally be tomorrow. We can think about this in terms of intergenerational impacts. And so I think one of the big challenges for people that are interested in the SDGs is, how do we know today whether or not we're on track, for example, to hit some kind of goal in 2030 or 2050, or, even further down the line, because of the complexity of the issues that we're confronting. There's a lot of nonlinear dynamics and complexities that play out. And so a lot of what I have been thinking about lately is, what would my dashboard look like today that tells me whether or not we're on course or not to get to desired end states at different points in time in the future? And then how do we, if we're not making the progress we want, how do we have additional interventions? And that requires a really, complex understanding of some of the dynamics involved in these goals.
Joel, can I ask one follow-on question there? What role do you see for the collective, the aggregate data of something like the SDG Action Manager in telling us something about how companies are contributing to the SDGs more broadly? We'll struggle to generalize always, right? We have some limitations to take into account, but what's the promise there for learning more broadly about business contributions to the SDGs?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly, I mean, that's what we see as one of the promises. I mean, if you go back to some of the comments that Matthew was making, for example, where you're doing this look in at your business, but also this look out at the landscape. And I think that what the SDG Action Manager and the other data that B Lab is collecting potentially enables is moving from that sort of meso organizational level to a more macro scale of understanding of like what are the impacts of business. And that could be, specific to a country or a region. And then of course you can roll up from there. But that I think is one of the promises, that the data hold. And so even though it's only a slice of the business, to the extent we can understand how representative that is or is not of the larger business community, we can start to understand, to Kendall's point, are there places where, for example, maybe businesses don't play or can't play? So maybe business is not the solution for all 17 SDGs, but it's really good at several of them collectively. Well, that would be really important information to understand from a policy perspective, and to understand where governments might need to play a larger role, or where NGOs might need to play a larger role, and vice versa, where maybe they're not. They don't need to devote their time and energy because we can come up with more market-oriented solutions to certain things. So I think that to me is if you step back, where you have an ecology of organizations involved, government, NGOs, business, trying to understand where business fits into the SDGs versus where other organizational forms might also play. I think that that's knowledge that I think we still lack, and I'm excited to see develop. So
one other point here too, and this is not necessarily to plug B Lab, but it kind of is a plug. I mean, I think one of the things that's interesting about B Lab is that there's a purposeful approach to making change through systems. So taking a variety of different approaches, whether it's certification, whether it's impact assessment, whether it's regulatory change, and applying pulling all of these different levers to see what makes a difference, and to potentially to supplement and complement one another, right? And I think that that's another area that is useful to explore here is what are the ways in which these kinds of systems interventions are encouraging approaches towards the SDGs, driving actual organizational efforts in different directions, as well as organizational impacts and societal impacts. And so looking at the effects of systems on systems change and systems impact, it would be really valuable here as well.
That's great to hear. And can I just echo, that's also the number one question that we as the Insights team at B Lab will try to be working with and working on, this collective of interventions and ways of approaching the system and seeing if in tandem, that's our theory, if in tandem they do make a difference to system change. So definitely a joint agenda there for research. Are there any final reflections from any of you to share with either the B Corps, the wider business community, or for our own learning?
I think I just have one more plug for the SDG Insights report that we had, just because it also speaks to if a company wants to go in there and see where are people, like what have we been able to see, different industries are focusing on different SDGs, what are the most prioritized SDGs. We've seen in our report that, for example, SDG 1 is the most prioritized, SDG 4 quality education is the least. And maybe if you are a business that are focusing on quality education, like this is maybe a call to encourage the business community to work more on it. So yeah, definitely check it out.
I think just on behalf of our author team, I would just say we're curious. So, please, open invitation at any point to reach out to any of us and kind of tell us, how it's going as you try to use some of the tools we've created. And likewise, feedback that, can help us provide, new insights back out to the, B Corp community. I think we're all ears and, very interested to hear from, B Corps that are really engaged in this work. So.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to be part of a community that is interested in exploring these overlaps between research and practice. And so, to the extent that we can take our theories and for them to be useful to you, and for your practice to in turn inform our thinking and theories, we're very grateful. So thanks.
Great. Well, thank you all then for your contributions, and of course for all the work that you've been doing to develop the paper, to develop the tools and the guidance, and the insights that you've brought today, but also in all your past work on the B Corp community and business sustainability more broadly. This event is happening as part of B Lab's September SDG campaign. Please follow along on social media, #the SDGs are your business, for more content related to how businesses can take action for the global goals and the 2030 agenda.